So welcome everybody, and today I'm talking with Sam Goldfinch, who is another certified clarity coach, and he's also a sobriety coach with a couple of other certifications to his name. He works with people who either want to stop drinking altogether or want to reduce their drinking and take back their power from alcohol. But he also works with other people who've got behaviour patterns that aren't serving them, which they want to change, and that could be anything from gambling and substance abuse through to any kind of behaviour, isn't it? Sam, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to involve any kind of substance at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. At the end of the day, we can, if something is no longer serving us, if we can sense that it's time for us to let something go, and yet we can't figure out how, that's a space that I love working in. And yeah, I mean, personally, for me, that journey really started with alcohol, but I definitely had issues with many other recreational drugs as well. So, so yeah, I find it all very interesting, and it's all interconnected. I don't see that these things are compartmentalized. We kind of talk about them in that way, but they're deeply connected as it seems to me.
And actually, can you speak a bit more to those connections, Sam?
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? So, I mean, I think we talk about, so people will have heard, terms like alcoholism or addict. And the thing with a label like that is that it very often boxes something or it fragments it. So it basically says, okay, I have a problem with alcohol, and I'm going to look at the alcohol as the issue, right? And it makes sense, right? Because that's what we can see that's around us. That's the thing that's causing destruction. But ultimately, it's like, that's the tip of the iceberg. That's what we can see. But all the reasons why it makes sense for us to drink or to abuse a substance or to gamble or to shop or whatever it might be, it's below the surface very often. And the courageous thing of looking in that direction. I mean, this is true from me in my personal journey, which I'll happily talk about. That can very often, the whole house of cards can collapse of its own accord. And we don't even have to look at the very thing that seems the most problematic. That's what's really curious. So yeah, everything's connected, as it seems to me. And it's curious. And sometimes it doesn't seem logical or that it kind of follows any sense as such, yeah.
And actually, can you tell us a bit more about your personal journey?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. So I mean, look, alcohol in the UK over here, I grew up in a small town, and it's very common, I would say, in the UK to drink young. And for me, it was really young. So I think I was 12 the first time that I got sort of intoxicated to the point of being silly. I can still remember standing outside the local shop and waiting for someone to buy us a bottle of cider between me and my mates. And very quickly over the course of my teenage years, I became very dependent on alcohol, marijuana. The reason being, it's very hard to say, isn't it, retrospectively, but I was struggling with OCD that was quite severe at the time, undiagnosed ADHD, and it was giving me a deep sigh, that moment of, wow, yeah, I can just be a teenager for 5 minutes. And so honestly, by the time I was 18, it was pretty deep. And the moment the structure came out of my life, so the moment I moved away from my wonderful family unit that I'm very grateful for, and I was very lucky to grow up in a kind of middle-class setting for school, a green leafy suburb, the moment that was taken away, I just found what I thought was structure instantly in drugs, alcohol, and just losing myself. In that, as a way of, I just had no skills for dealing with extreme anxiety, emotions, or any of that stuff. So yeah, it was very quick for me that I fell into that dependency. And from that day forth, I pretty much, for the next 5-6 years, I just didn't have a day where I wasn't under the influence of something. It just became part of normal living for me.
It's interesting you said it gave you structure.
Yeah, well, I mean, I say at the time, it filled the gap that the lack of structure had presented. So it's funny when I think about it. So university obviously is something where we're supposed to go it alone. We're supposed to build our own structure, read in our own, study, all that kind of stuff. I had done really well the preceding years of college, that because they were very structured. It was turn up at this time, leave at this time. I went to a particularly what's the word, kind of challenging college, as we call it here. And, and I kind of thrived alongside being a teenager who was drinking too much and all the rest of it. But yeah, the moment that was taken away from me, I didn't know what to do with it. So I just lent into, I think I lent into the substances, and I think I'd also associated freedom with those things, because I hadn't been honest with my parents. I hadn't told them what was, what was going on for me internally. I didn't know how to cope with it. So I'd buried it, repressed it. And so from that day, it was like, yes, okay, here we go. Let's explore this. And it just didn't stop. Sorry. It didn't really stop until I was probably, when I was 26, I washed up on the shores of Sort Your Life Out, Mate. And I had been traveling. So, I mean, there's so much more to this story, as there always is for any of us. But I had left, I'd left England when I was 22 or 23, and I traveled for the next 7 years. I worked in Poland. And when I was about 26, I started I effectively got a really great opportunity. I was the assistant director of a language school in Poland. And so suddenly I had 22 teachers relying on me, both for training, but also emotional support. And my reasons for drinking in particular shifted quite quickly. I was drinking to take the stress away. I was drinking to kind of cope I was still trying to celebrate life through substances as well, but that was kind of dwindling at that point. And it became a slippery slope quite quickly for me. So I was quite young when I started the journey. And yeah, but I just knew that the traditional routes weren't for me. So it just wasn't on the menu for me to go to AA. It just didn't resonate with me at all. I'm very grateful that, so alongside another huge piece of this puzzle was that when I was about 18, 19, when I started to experiment with other drugs other than alcohol, I started to have some kind of deep experience. Consciousness started to open up in me in a way that hadn't. I started going, oh shit, like maybe there's more to life than maybe I'm not my thoughts. I read The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle when I was about that time as well. My head fell off my shoulders when I read that, and it opened a world to me.
Yeah.
I became absolutely obsessed and addicted with reading absolutely anything and everything I could from Eastern traditions. I gobbled it all up, from the Tibetan Book of the Dead to the Tao Te Ching to, you name it. I would just read them. I consumed them, but it was absolutely a seeking thing. And it was therapeutic. It was nice. It was, while I was reading them, I would have insights and I would resonate. But then I would, if I were not doing that, I would fall into, addictions in other forms. And I the way I put it is I was trying to find myself and innocently losing myself at the same time.
Yeah.
So when I knew it was time to deal with it, I already knew there was nothing wrong with me. I had a very vast intellectual understanding of awakening, of all these different modes of spiritual traditions, and I really, at that time, I'd innocently become a bit of a spiritual materialist. I was this spiritual guy. I thought I knew how it worked.
Yeah.
And clearly I had a lot to see, which we'll talk about. But yeah, that was great though for me, because I knew that the solution to this wasn't going to be found for me in admitting that I was, for example, powerless, or for me, it was going to be in just peeling back the layers of the onion enough and figuring this out. I knew it was made of thought. I knew it was made of, this energy that moves through all of us. But I wouldn't have languaged it like that at the time.
No, sure.
But I knew that was true, and so I started that journey. And I'm glad, because at that point in time, quit lit, as they call it, literature around quitting anything was exploding at the time.
So when would this be? Can you remember which year we're in now?
So I'm 7 years alcohol free now. So let's do the math. So it would have been about 2015, something like that, I guess.
All right.
Yeah, there was a burgeoning growth of literature in that space. There were writers blogging and really moving into the new school of addiction, as I call it. So backed by new science, backed by, many different kind of a growth of understanding in what it meant to be free, that it was possible to actually return to a state that how you felt before you drank, where you didn't actually have to kind of be on guard the rest of your life, make your world smaller, avoid triggers. I just wasn't up for that. It just wasn't. I was going to be like, if that's it, I'll drink and be miserable. It just wasn't going to work.
It doesn't sound like a life for me, to be honest.
No. So yeah, I mean, that kind of, so that was the foundations of everything that I coach around, and what I believe, what I know to be true, in my experience. And yeah, so to me, at the core of this, it's always an understanding thing. It's how our experience of addiction, or the narrative we have around dependency, is being created, and insights into who and what we really are, which ultimately shine a light through that and allow us to kind of melt it. Anything can happen once those things start happening.
So it sounds like for you, the journey moved into getting coaching yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting. So there's two parts to my journey. There's the part where I first stopped drinking, and I didn't get any coaching at that time. I didn't even know what coaching was, to be honest with you. It wasn't on my radar. I'd never even heard of it. Genuinely. And so I was coaching myself by reading everything I could do, reading blogs, etc. Okay. So my community, my support network, they weren't talking back to me, but I was engaging with the stories that people had left on page, which was powerful, and it was helpful. And I actually did get to a point of making a decision to be a year alcohol free. Now that year turned into 18 months, and I learned a huge amount. So during that time, I traveled India, I trained to be a yoga teacher, I spent months in ashrams. I really started to look in the direction I'd always been looking in, but I didn't have alcohol in my system or other drugs to, I don't believe there's any kind of condition required. I think people can have insights, whatever's happening in their life, but I just cleared the way a bit for me to really start having deeper insights. And now I've kind of lost my train of thought as to where we were going, but there we go. So go on, sorry.
Coaching. How you got to the coaching world, I guess.
Yeah, so along that way, I started to have those insights, but I did go back to drinking after 18 months. The reason being that I didn't know how to go towards romantic relationships, dating. I had some real social anxiety. I had unresolved things in and around kind of my neurology, like when it comes to ADHD and OCD, there were things that would flare up at certain times. And there were just things ultimately, there were things around how my experience was being created that I hadn't clocked, because it's so obvious. It doesn't look like it works how it works.
It doesn't, does it?
No. So it got very painful for me. Those few months, they weren't my worst on paper for drinking, but they absolutely, they shone a light on the things that I needed to look at in order to heal. So I started blogging. I started a blog called Unaddicted, which is still out there. I don't write on it now, but if anyone's interested, you can go check that out. And yeah, that was sort of cathartic. It was self-therapy. That helped me clear out some old stuff. I started talking to my parents through the blog, and then through with my voice, I started really learning what it was like to reconnect with myself and other people. I had a few plant medicine journeys that kicked my ass and really helped me understand there's a few things that you really don't get here, mate. Ultimately, I fell into the principles, and that was profound for me, because it was for whatever reason, and I know this is something we hear again and again, that despite the decade of searching, I'd absorbed everything in the thousands of hours that I had spent searching through spiritual texts and traditions. There was something about the simplicity of the inside out understanding that just blew my mind completely. But yeah, that's it. And so it took me to coaching, and so I wanted to give back. I finally found true freedom after that time. I started to understand that choosing to live life without alcohol was actually a rebellion, as I call it. My business, I called it the Sober Rebellion, because it's subversive. There's this story and this narrative out there that drinking is badass, and people talk about, I threw up and I did this and I did that as if it's cool. When actually, using a numbing agent to go through life and actually not knowing how to feel our feelings, not being with the full beauty of the human experience it's innocent. This is not me. I'm not here to put any judgment on anybody, but I realized that it's really badass to go on that journey like that. That's the brave thing. That's the courageous thing.
It is the brave thing. Yeah. You know what, Sam? When I was still working as an osteopath, and I was treating men with chronic fatigue syndrome. They
Yeah.
found it so hard not to go to the pub if they went to the pub and not drink.
Yeah.
And I can remember saying, you're not doing your liver any favours by knocking back 6, 8, 10, whatever pints a night. But to say, no, I'm not drinking was really hard.
And for me, it was wisdom in action, as we often talk about, until it wasn't. So when I was a teenager, if I went back in time now, would I take that away from me? No way, because I had some serious stuff going on in my mind. Well, it felt serious at the time, and no one had picked up on it. I was pushing it down. It was the 90s. People weren't talking about things like they are now. And so I was struggling. I was suffering through my own thoughts, but the experience was the experience I was having. It made sense to me. I would not take that tool away. But then we get to a point in our lives where we realize, okay, this is not serving me. There's more here. And then we can end up in a bind. Then we can end up in, the very common bind in with alcohol or drug use of any form is, ultimately I drink and I'm miserable, or I use and I'm miserable. I don't drink and I'm miserable. Like, there's got to be a third door. Well, there is a third door. My job as a coach is to help people understand that it's always been there, and it's far closer than you think. And so, it's a powerful space to be in. It's beautiful. I mean, many of my clients that come and work with me to either go on the journey with alcohol, they then roll into an exploration of deep spiritual principles, or it may be the principles, however it works for them. Many of them may be Buddhist, or many of them may have it. It's funny, isn't it, Sorrel, that for whatever reason, people that come and knock on my door these days, the things they pick up on are very interesting. There's often alcohol or substance at play, but what actually comes and makes them knock is perhaps a conversation like this, where we talk about, who we really are and those kinds of things.
And there's something really attractive about the notion that we can discover who we truly are.
I just do not have words for how grateful I am for the last 3 or 4 years of my life. And I have no idea what preparation was there that was required, but, stumbling across the principles and Sid and Jamie and Michael Neal and all these amazing voices in this space. It's just not as well known, but it's an incredible metaphor. For whatever reason, for me, it's the metaphor that really helped me get it. And have some deep knowing, some deep inner knowing about who and what I really am. And that has been the greatest gift. Like, the idea that I would ever pour a substance back into my life that may cloud that in some way, it just doesn't make sense to me. Now, that to me is freedom. That's very different to stopping drinking, because the goal is not that. The goal is to just for it not to make any sense. Alcohol is here. It's out there. And for some people, they do, and this is, they do what they want to do. I work with people to drink less too, but if there's a knowing in anybody that there's more to life, and this thing seems to be stopping that flow, then it's a wonderful place to explore, and it is a rebellion, and it is cool, and it's a journey, and there's going to be a lot of magic along the way.
And I was thinking as you're speaking that for some people, once they've understood that the alcohol is not the problem, and that the problem is the kinds of thinking they were having that were driving them towards the alcohol, then I imagine they can drink if they want to and not drink if they want to. And it's like it's independent of everything else. It's like a choice that you make in the moment, as opposed to something you think, oh, I've got to have another drink. Yeah,
I think that can happen to some. So it's an interesting question, because obviously if you go into the world of 12 steps or AA or many, it's you keep yourself safe by never having that one drink. And if things work for people, I think that's wonderful, and we can only acknowledge that ourselves. But I have worked with a number of people who have come. So a few examples of people that don't drink a lot, but they've come to work with me because their reason for drinking is that they've started drinking in response to trauma or something, and they've sensed in their soul that this isn't right. Now, interestingly, what has sometimes happened as we've worked together is that the guilt and the shame and whatever was going on for them finds its own expression. It finds its way through, and then things shift very quickly. So they either just stop, or they realize, oh, actually having that drink every now and again or whatever, it just isn't. It doesn't have the meaning that it used to me. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Now, for other people, they may have a neurologic, in the sense that if you've been drinking heavily, like I was for every single day, in terms of neural pathways and neurology and all those, it's a separate discussion, but there is like a reality to that in the level of form. Now, the way that you deal with that in many traditional routes is you build fear around that. So you say, if you ever have that one drink, those neural pathways will light up in your brain, and then you'll be trapped. Now, I don't see that can be very. There are certain personalities for whom that can be very powerful, and as I say, we have to make our own decisions about that. Now, for me, I know that if I go and drink a beer, that may be the case for me. It may do that scientifically, but my reason for not grabbing that drink has got nada to do with that. It makes no difference to me, and so I'm not afraid of that. When I was in Spain, a couple of months back. This is just a very quick thing, and I accidentally grabbed my brother's. He had like a coffee, right? It was in the evening. I took a swig of it. I didn't know it was full of bloody amaretto, whatever they'd stuck in his coffee. I knew instantly. I was like, oh God, it tastes like shit, because I haven't drunk alcohol for so long. And it was now, to me, I just went, oh God. And I, just had a swig of water to get rid of it and just moved on. Now, it doesn't mean anything. There was no intention behind that. It didn't cause me to suddenly start craving or thinking. It just, not true. It just didn't happen because I'm free. Now, for someone else who has a different philosophy, a different ideology that keeps them safe as they see it, they may have had a very different experience.
And there would have been that fear, and I'd imagine some thinking about it. And
So yeah, I tend to, so as I say, it's a very, very important point for me to make. I am not anti anything. I believe that many of the traditional modes of freedom have helped thousands, millions of people get free. But I just think there's so many other ways to find freedom, and pretending that there's only one way doesn't help anybody. I mean, I knew without a doubt that wasn't my way. And I know that there are millions of people who feel like, I don't know what to do about this. The only option near me is AA, for example, or whatever it might be near them. And I don't want to go. I don't want to do that. So what do I do? So yeah, it's important to have other ways out there. And that's why I do what I do.
That's, it's so brilliant to hear you say that, because as you're speaking, I'm also thinking that for the people who work the way that you work, who approach it the way you approached it, is that they discover something they didn't know before about who they are. And that is so powerful.
It's the same story, isn't it? That once we realize that the experience we've been having is created by thought, that it is, to use another metaphor, a story or a narrative, and that it's not any more of a thing than how anything works. This energy that moves through us, it doesn't respond to the laws of, like this pen, that if I put it outside, it's going to take however many decades to disappear, perhaps never, just like whatever. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. I can have an insight about who I am, and in an instant like that, 20 years of imprisonment can fold away when I realize that it's not real. That's amazing. You're not working at the level of the construct of thought there. You're not constructing new thought. You're not creating new structures in order to try and contain a new way of living. You're literally melting the previous way and just being who you really are underneath it, which I agree with you. It's just a different way of doing it, and just very magical. And it opens up not only puts something on the menu we didn't even know was there, but it takes us into an entirely new mode of living, a way of being. So yeah, it's pretty cool when you think of it like that.
It is really cool. Well, thank you, Sam. That was amazing.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
I'm always interested to see what comes out of my mouth each time I get asked a question. It's great, isn't it?
And just for anyone listening, Sam's going to be contributing to the Post-Traumatic Growth Summit on Thursday, November the 24th
I will.
at 7 p.m. And we'll see you there.
Yeah, excited. Can't wait.